Welcome to the Chronicles of Darkness. I'm so happy that you've chosen to go here with me, to come here into the darkness. This is something that I've been working on for a long time. I think about 5-6 years ago is when I started to get sick and tired of love and light, and recognized that it wasn't describing the reality as I experienced, that there was more going on, and that I felt deceived by love and light teachings. And so I spent years asking people, traveling around the world, speaking to gurus and spiritual teachers, explain to me, what is evil? I want to understand it. And I didn't get any satisfactory answers. So this Chronicle of Darkness is my attempt to explain what I found and the understandings that I have. And I have to ask myself, is it useful to share this? And what are the consequences? And well, I believe that the consequences are very real. We can either choose to stay asleep and be afraid of the monster under the bed, or we can turn the light on and see the monster for what it is. And I love this quote by Carl Jung. I think this puts it into perspective. One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. And so for most of our ancestors, earthly spirits and witchcraft and magic and gods are and were very real. We saw the earth and the sky as full of beings, whether we call them gods or divinities or ancestral spirits or ghosts or shades or nature spirits, and that these spirits had their own agendas, that they weren't, all good or all evil, that they could help if we served them, if we bargained with them, they could help us and support us, and that they could harm as well. And that the job as a human was to be in good relation with these spirits. So what is on the other side of darkness, or what can we find in darkness? Well, I believe that in darkness we find freedom, we find our power, we recover more self-awareness, and it is in the darkness that we can find our goodness. Most people don't want to acknowledge, admit that there is darkness, or even look at evil. But I'm so grateful that you're here for this. So we need to talk a little bit about language. So, we are speaking in a European language, we're speaking in English, and English is based on nouns. And what it means to be based on nouns is that everything is substance, this and that, things, as if the things in themselves is reality, whereas a language like Sanskrit is verb-based. So it's not the thing, it's what the thing is doing. That's the focus, the doing of the thing. So this affects the way we think about reality, and so our experience of reality. So where we're going now, it will be more about the verb as in what it's doing, rather than the concrete kind of form it has. I hope that I'm able to explain this limitation of language through language. And I also want to reach out with a word of warning as we go down into this kind of rabbit hole. Like, the intention is not to become obsessed with darkness and to be, a spiritual warrior in the sense that that becomes our identity. And we've talked about the different archetypes in the shaman's heart, and to be a warrior is only one of 4, and for us here in the spiral it's one of 5. The healer, the warrior, the master, the visionary, and the wise woman, right? It's not to be at war all the time, but it means that it's just one part. But what it means is that we need to be vigilant, we need to be alert, we need to be attentive, and we need to be ready for those moments. And the true spiritual liberation isn't about how many demons we fight when we're here. It's about how well we live, how well we love, and how much we learn while we're here. And this is a quote from a shaman. It says, "My helper spirits are not so hard to control. It's the people and their immorality that I worry about." And here's the question then. Why is it that the dominant culture, this dominant civilization that we're in, is so excruciatingly, relentlessly, insanely, genocidally, ecocidally, suicidally destructive? You can see it, right? What is going on in this world? Well, here's a quote from Don Juan in the book by Carlos Castaneda. He was quoted as saying, "We have a companion for life. We have a predator that came from the depths of the cosmos and took over the rule of our lives. Human beings are its prisoners. This predator is our Lord and Master." And so most of us can relate to this kind of idea, right? That there is something that stops us from living to our full potential. We're stuck with these time bandits that are taking precious hours of our lives. We have to pay to live on this planet now, and things are becoming more expensive, and the poor are becoming poorer, and the middle classes are becoming poorer, and a few rich are becoming much, much richer, right? So Don Juan says that these entities took over, these predators took over because we are their food. Just like we are chickens, these predators rear humans. And these predators give us their mind, which becomes our mind. It's as if these predators are in competition with us for the share of our mind. They shapeshift and assume our form, and if we're unaware of their masquerade, we will identify with these invasive thought forms and act them out as if they were our own. We will mistakenly believe that we're acting out our own impulses with our best interests in mind. This predator is afraid that we're going to uncover it and that we're going to deny it its food. So it's through their mind that these predators inject into us whatever is convenient for them. They put on our skin and use us as a disguise and fool us into buying this fake reality of who we are. This is like a foreign installation, like they've put up or installed a program in our mind. This is exactly similar to what the Gnostics were pointing at when they talked about an alien predator or mind parasite that they call the archons, that infiltrate and subvert the workings of our mind. And when we're not conscious of this alien takeover of our psyche, we become actors in their agenda. We become their slaves. The state of this inner psychological warfare is very much mirrored by the kind of psyops that are happening in the outside world around us now, where we can't trust the media anymore, right? And this disease feeds on our unawareness of it. So our task, our job, is to discern this predator's mind within ourselves and refuse to feed it anymore. So let's talk about a few definitions then. This conversation about darkness will only work if you're able to agree with me on this one kind of fundamental concept, which is that you are a soul. It's not that you have a soul, it's that you are a soul, and that your soul is immortal. And another definition, and I'm going to go into this a little bit deeper in a few moments, is we need to be clear what we mean when we say ego. Because obviously there is an ego that we need to have in order to function. And again, English language is very limited because we only have this one word to talk about the ego, whereas in Sanskrit, for example, there's the word ahamkara, which is the kind of toxic part of the ego. Then I want to use this kind of phrase, autonomous complex. Autonomous means when something is in control of itself, right? So it's a complex part of the psyche that was split off due to some kind of shock or trauma that seems to have gone on its own way or created its own life, that it's got its own free will. And that this kind of split in our consciousness creates this kind of demonic complex. And it's behaving as though it's out to get us. I also used the word disease with a hyphen, so dis-ease rather than, dis-ease. And same with the word disorder. So when we're talking about a lot of mental health issues, right, to think about it as disorder, which means chaos. And I want to go further into chaos as well. Another understanding is of reality. When we say reality, what do we mean? And most of us are thinking, well, reality, it's this ordinary, mundane, consensual reality where we all are. Whereas most non-European traditions understand reality as being a dream. The word psyche means something along the lines of soul, mind, or spirit. And so psychosis is a term that was created by psychiatry that used to be known as demonic possession. So when a person loses their mind completely, they're possessed. And then this last word, watiku, is a word that I really like to use when talking about evil, because watiku isn't English. It comes from Cree, Native American or Indigenous American language, and there's variations in other languages too. So watiku was a human who became extremely greedy and selfish and was transformed into a predatory monster. And it's understood to be a mind virus, and that this mind virus is in all of us. We are all host carriers of what the natives call watiku now. Watiku deludes us, the host, into believing that cannibalizing the life force of others is a logical and morally upright way to live. Watiku convinces us that we are on the good side, that we are doing the good work. Paul Levy, who wrote the book Dispelling Watiku, calls it malignant egophrenia. This is when the ego, the ahamkara ego, the toxic ego, is completely unchained from real reason, from reality, and it becomes entirely malevolent in the sense of cancer, and it just grows and grows. So let's talk about conspiracies then, right? And the word conspiracy actually etymologically means to breathe together. So let's breathe together. So the first thing I'm going to say is, if the soul exists, if the immortal soul is real, then so are demons. And according to this recent study, and this is on Americans, I couldn't find a study done on this in Europe, but I'm sure it would be fairly similar. The younger people are, the more they believe in demons. That there is some kind of invisible, non-corporeal entity that we can call demon that can take control of a human being. Our ancestors could call them gods. Ignorant people call them myths or conspiracy ideas. The Bible calls them demons. And the Gospel of John says that the devil is the ruler of the world. The Gospel of Luke says the devil, the kingdom of the world are under the devil's control. The first epistle of John says the whole world lies under the power of the evil one. And the Gospel of Philip says the root of evil lies within all of us, and says it masters us, we are its slaves, and it takes us captive. So to have this kind of condescending idea that, we're modern, enlightened people and we're too sophisticated to believe in something as primitive as demons is to cut yourself off from reality. Because these psychic conditions that breed demons inside of us are as active as ever. Demons haven't disappeared, but they've changed their names and they've changed their form. They are unconscious psychic forces, and dismissing the idea of demons will do you more harm than good. So, a few things about demons. Demons have limitations. Demons are chaotic energy. Demons are not to be feared. And demons can take possession of human bodies. Also, not all negative experiences is the work of demons. Demons are able to decide, manipulate, distract, intimidate, and depress us. And demons hide in the mundane and in the ordinary, in the uninteresting. But demons can also glamour. So, evil. We can't afford to have a concept of evil that is too small. If we see evil as something far away and scary and, not at all anything to do with me, I'm not in reality. So evil is there as an opposite force. And we need this opposite force because it's creating this infinity movement from light to dark, right? When somebody is full-blown watiku, they have nothing to react to. They feel empty inside. And you know this if you've ever investigated the kind of really dark personality disorders, that these people feel completely empty. Not empty in the sense of what we're striving for with the hollow bone, but empty in the sense that there is nothing that moves inside. They have no more heart. And this means that evil cannot see themselves or self-reflect on themselves. And this is one of the primary characteristics of evil, the inability to look at oneself. So, to make a story, to make a good story, there has to be this opposition between the hero and the villain. And actually, for a really good story, the kind of plan or the storyline of the hero is less important than the plot of the enemy. It's the enemy that helps the hero grow. It's the enemy that shows the hero how to be strong, how to be brave, and where to find its courage. When we have a demon like Watiku take up residence inside of us, this is our initiation to become the hero or the heroine of our own story. The word in Buddhism is bodhisattva. A bodhisattva is a being in the process of awakening, and it is this very fight against the demon that calls forward our brilliance and our creative power. So here's another example of this kind of pairing, right, of a hero and a villain. And without Voldemort, Harry Potter would have been a pretty boring guy. Also, this Agent Smith versus Neo. And then lastly, just to keep it on the light side again, Ariel versus Ursula, which is so speaking as well about, kind of women and losing our voice and giving away our voice in order to have freedom, right? So this idea, right, that if we don't honor the creative light, and creativity is one of our most powerful allies when it comes to freeing ourselves from Watiku, if we don't honor that light within us, we will be transformed into something dark. Okay, so let's talk about ego. I love the Hatha Yoga definition of ego as chronic muscular tension. So you imagine somebody who's walking around chronically tense, and then anything happens and it's like, wah! Like everything just goes crazy. So to have a healthy ego is to have gentle strength. And we need to have an ego to function in the world. Self-identity and the ego isn't something that somebody else gives to you, like when your parents give you your name. Your ego is created through interaction with others. And it's not a bad thing. We need a strong ego. We need a strong sense of self, because if we don't have a strong sense of self, we will be overtaken by everybody else, and all these archetypal forces, both light and dark, will work through our unconscious, and we will compulsively act them out. Part of the journey of the ego to become sovereign is also to surrender. And in order to surrender, we have to have something that we can let go of. Surrendering to what? Well, to this greater than ourselves, greater than the small self. And so part of the process of evolution is to create a strong ego and then to surrender that ego. The ego is surrendered through knowledge. And I love this by Einstein. The more the knowledge, the lesser the ego. The lesser the knowledge, the more the ego. So when we have an ego, that's the ego definition of ahamkara, the kind of the I maker. We set ourselves up against the world. Whereas when we have this healthy ego and we have knowledge, it's not me against the world, it's me of the world, or me in the world, or the world is me. And then being able ultimately again to surrender the ego. So here's the thing with language, right? When somebody's behaving out of sorts, we say, what's gotten into you? And so when we don't have a strong ego and a strong sense of who I am, then we don't notice when we're acting out of sorts, when something gets into us, and we just do as we're quote unquote told. Wetiku is a virus. It comes through ideas. It works through our language. It changes the way we interpret reality. Wetiku is not only in people, it can also be held by books, by movies, by music. And that the kind of reality that we are in together is a collective spell. And people who don't know how to leave the perspective of the consensual, mundane, ordinary reality, people who don't do shamanic journeys, for example, never realize that they're under this spell. But those of us who can, we're able to come out of ourselves, and then we can see Wetiku through its symptoms. So some symptoms of Wetiku, and for me, the first ones that I uncovered and the ones that really encompass all the other ones is feeling separate from life and having an insatiable greed. Now, feeling separate, of course, the ego is, I'm not you. You're not me. Yes, on one level, like in one dimension, we're all the same. But here in mundane reality, I'm not you, you're not me, we're different. But to feel separate from life is another thing entirely. And then this insatiable greed, this insatiable hunger for taking resources, seeing that, consumption is going to save you, that things need to grow, we need more, without seeing the result of that greed. And then you have more sort of ways of noticing Wetiku within yourself, which is that you're feeling, a lot of negative emotions, quote unquote negative emotions, but that they're mostly there, that it's not this balance with other emotions, it's mostly negative emotions, that you're fighting against yourself. I don't want to smoke that cigarette. Oh, I'm smoking a cigarette. Go on, just have a little one. Kind of self-defeating mindset, and it's really hard to be the person you want to be and do the things that you want to do. Wetiku is difficult to see because it doesn't have form. It's not a noun, it's a verb. But the main thing with Wetiku is a person who is under the spell of Wetiku is not authentic. They are an imitation of a person. They're living an imitational life. There's also this sense of arrogance, self-righteous belief that they are the only one who knows the truth, or that they're part of a group that knows the truth and that they're working for the good. It's like they split themselves in their mind. They split their mind into two parts, because the one part is the doing of the dark deeds, or the one that insults you, or the one that steals or hurts somebody, and then the other part is covering that up and saying, no, that never happened. They're gaslighting themselves, right? And it's all this protection so that they don't have to see their own dark parts, and that's the kind of split that happens. If you know 1984 by George Orwell, it's that kind of double think, to be able to gaslight yourself into believing your own lies. And the more Wetiku somebody has, and we call it like full-blown Wetiku, they are completely emotionally stunted, and their only emotions are the kind of archaic emotions of anger, frustration, rage, and numbness. And typically they go between feeling numb and feeling rage, and there's no empathy or compassion. They don't see other people as independent, autonomous beings, but disposable units that they can use for what they need us for. They take delight in having power over others, getting away with something. They enjoy kind of dominating other people or dehumanizing other people. And here's the thing, right? There's this kind of love and light concept of an empath, which is a noun, right? An empath, which doesn't exist in kind of psychological language. In psychology, it's being empathic, which is a verb. But when you say I'm this noun, I am an empath, and then you start looking at how empaths talk about narcissists, which they feel are their opposite, right? And I'm not defending narcissists, but what I'm saying is that when you look at how kind of forums for empath forums talk about narcissists, it can be completely dehumanizing these other people, and this is a sign of Wetiku. So kind of using labels to define everything and creating everything to being nouns, it's sort of institutionalizing our way of thinking. And another thing is that people who are in Wetiku's possession will then channel that kind of vibratory frequency so that other psychic resonance reinforces their agreements with Wetiku and the deranged view of reality that they have. So these kind of people with the same flavor of Wetiku come together, and then anyone who challenges their shared reality is seen as a threat and completely demonized. You can't have a rational conversation with somebody who's under the spell of Wetiku. They are not able to discern. Their discernment has been disabled and distorted through the lens of Wetiku. People who have Wetiku cannot see it in themselves. When somebody is full-blown in Wetiku, the Wetiku forces them to protect and collude and feed into their psychosis more and more. And when you're really in possession of Wetiku, you lose the capacity to recognize Wetiku in others. And this is what I want this to be. I want this to be an opening so that you can see how Wetiku works, and that Wetiku works intrapersonal, like within us, but also interpersonal, so between us, and also collectively, and also transpersonally, meaning in other realms, that it's not only working here. And Wetiku is especially malignant in the fourth dimension. And here's the thing about Wetiku. People who are full-blown in Wetiku are some of the most charming, disarming, and entrancing people. They can be really, really, really good looking. It's called like glamour, right? They glamour us so that we become enthralled by their magic. It's black magic. And they use our hopes and our drive for, sexuality, our needs and our fears to drain our power. And they use the most primitive of emotions, fear and sexuality, so that they can bypass our logical brain and go directly to the reptilian brain, which is all about survival instincts. And it's like a magician, they draw our attention away from what they're really doing so that we don't see the trick. And Wetikus live in a world where, facts and truth doesn't matter. It's all about this kind of illogic, nonsensical. They have this strange way of reasoning about themselves, which doesn't make sense if you stop to think about it, because they've split themselves in two. They become this schizoid, and they are disassociated from themselves. So one hand doesn't know what the other hand is doing, so they're doing this magic to themselves at the same time. And if you've ever had to deal with a person like this who's full-blown in Wetiku, because we all have, we're all infected, but people who are full-blown, you can see it. You can see that kind of separation of soul, Wetikus are all into, money and consumer culture, but also they consume the life force of others for their own private gain or for profit, and they don't give anything back. They enjoy especially our kind of lower frequency emotions. And for Wetiku, they don't need help. For them, they're not the problem. Other people are the problem. And they don't have a problem with their dis-ease or their disorder, because the disorder is their owner, right? So we have kind of small Wetikus, which are, the people who are tyrants at home or at work, but in the real world, they don't really have any power, like the abusive boyfriend who, when he goes on the street, he becomes small. Then you have these big Wetikus who climb the Wetiku ladder and who get into real positions of power in the world. And they're particularly dangerous because they have power over, the mainstream media and politics, and they learn to exploit every situation to their advantage, and they don't even care if they have to sacrifice themselves, because it's not the person, it's not the noun, it's the verb. And to become a big Wetiku, you need to do a lot of backstabbing, ass-kissing, scheming, strategizing, and maneuvering. It's a really acquired taste, and it's not for everyone. And it's easy to become seduced by Wetiku, because our society gives this kind of behavior a lot of perks and incentives. People who go with Wetiku will get promoted, they'll get better salaries, they'll get more testimonials, and the gold watch. And most Wetikus are masterminded. They're the full-blown Wetikus become like these really master predators. They can be really suave and sophisticated, very intelligent, very educated people with refined tastes. Often, New York, London kind of high-risers, highly respected in the community. And all of this makes it really hard to recognize. And then there's other people who become their handlers, right? Who protect them, like their minions or their enablers and their supporters and their followers. They see the Wetiku's power and they want to be close to that. And some people are unwitting Wetikus, so people who, work in the office or who's just doing their job, but they kind of look away. And I know with the Me Too movement, those people were really exposed, right? Like, how could this have been going on without anybody saying anything? Well, because people are uncomfortable. They don't want to look at evil, so they just look away. And then the evil gets in through the back of their head instead, right? Full-blown Wetikus are soul murderers. They keep recreating the process that they're in themselves of killing their own soul. And because it hurts them so much, they do it to others. They're compelled to do it to others. Because what the soul does to itself, it can't help but do to others. And this is a sort of perverse inversion of the golden rule. Like, instead of treating other people like how they would like to be treated, Wetikus do unto others what was done to them. Wetikus are living in this kind of timeless cycle of abuse. Full-blown Wetikus do this without any guilt or shame because they don't have a heart or a soul anymore. So how does Wetiku spread? Well, Wetiku can only thrive when we all enable and become complicit in the cycle. Wetiku is not limited to these kind of, big Wetikus. It's in the nice people, the small people, the people on the street, you and me. They need all of us to be involved in order for Wetiku to take over. So how does it spread? Well, it can spread through being, in close proximity to somebody, by wearing their clothes, by touching something that they touched, through the eyes, through speaking with somebody, through any kind of touch. We call this like the Runada Banda, right? But it can also be through these other outlets like music, music videos and songs and films and books, pornography, training programs like military training programs, comic books. It's insidious and it's everywhere. So what do we do? Well, we need to accept that we are in spiritual warfare and that it's not on a foreign enemy, but that the war is happening inside of ourselves. The worst part about this is that we have allowed it to happen. We have used our own free will to invite Wetiku in. We are ultimately responsible for our state, the state of our soul. No being can steal our soul, but these Wetikus have gotten so good that they actually trick us into giving our soul away. The culture of Wetiku corrupts, and that everybody, all of us, are corrupted, and we're willing subscribers to this enslaved condition. And how can we come out of it? Well, just as a doctor or a physician have to study the disease that they're going to heal, we have to understand the psychopathology, the sickness of Wetiku in our world and in ourselves if we're going to heal from it. We can see it in the outside world, colonization, exploitation, plundering, profiteering, stealing these resources of Mother Nature without replacing them. We can also see it in this kind of increased artificial intelligence reality that we're being pulled into, and we're all paying for it, right? Like, we're all buying the phones and buying the laptops and paying for the Wi-Fi connections, and we are participating actively in the spiritual warfare for the dark side. And this is something that I've been saying for years. There is a spiritual war going on, and if you don't know what side you're on, you're definitely playing for the dark side. So what does it mean to say that something is a soul eater? Well, there's the nice word for it, was psychophagic. So Wetikus are psychophagic. They're soul eaters. And just like the hungry ghost in Buddhist tradition, the more it eats, the bigger its stomach grows. It can never be satisfied. And again, if you have met one of these full-blown big watikus, then you will recognize that too, that it doesn't matter how much you give to them, they will never be satisfied. They cannot possess anything really, because they're not in possession of themselves. All they can do is continue to consume, but they will never feel full. And who are the victims of watiku? Well, the first layer are, the people who are easily manipulated, the sheeple, the people who don't think for themselves, the people that just go with the flow and that follow the kind of predetermined life path, that are what Martin Luther King calls, lazy-minded and tough-hearted or hard-hearted. People who are out of touch with their own inner guidance, people who project authority as outside of themselves, that are suggestible to whatever everybody else is doing, that's what I'm going to do too. The people who lack discernment and critical thought. People who choose to be asleep, people who choose to stay asleep, people who see consciousness as something other. But then there's also a kind of energy that watiku is really attracted to, which is the people who are on their spiritual path, people who are energetically sensitive and charged, people who are on the journey to liberation, people who are really embodying light, because just as much as watiku is attracted to the kind of lower energy vibration, they are also really attracted to the high frequency vibration, because this is delicious food. So the victims of watiku are in these kind of categories, but anyone who can further the watiku agenda will be great for them. So to get out of watiku, we have to come out of this kind of group think and herd mentality. We have to say what we really mean. We have to have this strong ego and this sense of integrity within ourselves, to not go with the flow, but to go against the grain and say, actually, it isn't a sign of health to be well adjusted to a sick society and to be like everybody else. So let's talk a little bit more about where watiku gets in and how. So first we have to talk about this word psyche, right? Psyche is the most dense, dark, and mysterious thing that we know, that we can imagine. We know as little about the psyche as we know what life really is. It's like a fish doesn't see water, and we don't see what the psyche does, because it's through the psyche that we see. The psyche is the matrix. And be very clear here, the word matrix in Latin means womb. It's not a computer game. Matrix is womb. And so the maternal womb out of which civilization was born is the psyche. And it is also out of the psyche that the destroyer, the war, is born. So both the origin and the resolution of the crisis can be found in the psyche. So it's really important that we pay attention to the role of the psyche in our affairs. The veil is thinning, the veil is being lifted. And the role of the psyche and what it does in how it co-creates the world is being shown to us. It's when we see the world as different or separate from our psyche that we risk to be exposed to watiku. because Wetiku takes advantage of the fact that there is no actual boundary between the inner and the outer. And it is when we separate ourselves from life that we are in the first symptom of Wetiku. So Wetiku can trick us and deceive us by materializing itself through the medium of the outside world. And so we assume that it's distinct from our psyche, it's external to ourselves. So Wetiku can use the world around us as a canvas. But the origin of the psyche, or the origin of the Wetiku, is in our psyche. The Wetiku manifests as a disturbance in the field of the collective unconscious psyche, the psychic ley lines on which the world is energized. And trauma. We have to talk about trauma, because trauma is what causes the separation or the splitting of the soul. I don't know how interested you are in psychology, but the most kind of recent understandings is that all psychological diseases and disorders are caused by trauma. Except I think for psychopathy, where they say psychopathy is something that you're born with. And I don't know if that's true or not. I can't speak to it. Again, we don't understand the psyche as well as they would like you to believe that we do. But what we can say shamanically is that trauma results in soul loss. And when we have soul loss, the soul splits or fragments. And those parts that fragment off disassociate from us. And these disassociated parts disconnect us from ourselves. When we have soul loss, those parts of the soul are frozen in time, where they are then stuck in the cycle of repeating and reliving the trauma. So maybe, somebody abused you, and then you end up becoming the abuser yourself in order to try to come back in. But we have to do the work of reintegration to become in our integrity again. So people who have been traumatized will kind of alternate again with this, what I said earlier, feeling numb, feeling nothing, feeling empty, and then repeating the trauma again and again and again. And one of the ways where this is really evident is in romantic relationships, right? So trauma is also connected to this kind of collective unconscious, because it's in our collective unconscious that this starts, or where it can come in. So in addition to our immediate consciousness, which is a thoroughly personal nature, there is this second psychic system that is the collective, universal, impersonal nature, which is identical in all of us. We are all connected to this collective unconscious. And this is where we have, the parts of ourself, the anima and the animus, the masculine and the feminine part of our soul. It is also where we work with, the energy of archetypes. And whenever the kind of contents of the collective unconscious become activated, it has an unsettling effect on the conscious mind of all of us. When we have some kind of trauma, it goes into the collective unconscious, and when we heal that trauma, we heal that fragmentation in the collective unconscious as well. The greatest danger that Carl Jung saw to humanity is if millions of us, billions of us, go into unconsciousness together, because we will be reinforcing each other's blind spots and will feed into a contagious collective psychosis. And I think his greatest fear is realized. I think this is where we are. We're desperately trying to keep ourselves safe and protected, and in doing that, we're destroying each other, ourselves, and the world, the biosphere. We are feeding and supporting our own genocide, because our greatest resource, our healthy ego and our mind, is being polluted and corrupted by this Wetiku energy from being in a saturated Wetiku culture. And so again, this splitting, and I need to talk about the devil. So the devil, unlike Wetiku or kind of demonic energy, demons are chaos. The devil is order. And in the kind of spiritual arena, the devil has two faces, we shall say. According to Paul, he comes as this roaring lion who persecutes believers. But there is also, and this I think is more of the devil in Europe, the angel of light, who works through human agents teaching false doctrine. And the kind of angel of light will captivate you because, 80% of what this angel tells you resonates with you because it's true. But then there's this 20% that is leading you astray and again, infiltrating and tricking you into opening the door and allowing the Wetiku in. In shamanism, we have this understanding of the trickster. And I think talking about, devils and demons and Satan, it can be quite scary. So this is where, coming back to shamanism and the understanding that it's not good or bad, and again, we can talk about the yin and the yang. There's some good in the bad and there's some bad in the good, but really it's all just, blending. So when we talk about Satan, it can get quite serious and quite terrifying, and we don't want to live there. But when we talk about the trickster, we can kind of do it with a bit more of a smile, because Wetiku needs to be approached with our imagination. If we see the Wetiku as a sort of soulless, empty shell, a person who can be a shapeshifter, they can be disguised as a good spirit, it's easy for us to, fall into believing them. Or we can see them as this kind of evil, archetypal devil character, something outside of ourselves. And this is again a danger, because then you're becoming afraid of your own shadow. Whereas when we see that the Wetiku is this kind of multidimensional trickster, it's playing a game with us. Wetiku doesn't exist outside of ourselves. If it doesn't have anything to feed on, it would die. It only exists when we give it food. And this kind of trickster spirit is there to create chaos and difficulty and challenges, and again, to show us who we really are. The Wetiku trickster spirit enables us to be the magic. Magic, the definition of magic is creating order out of chaos. That's the definition of alchemy, right? So again, when we can see the trickster and we can kind of smile at it, we take away its power over us. So trying to heal, or desperately, seeking the cure and kind of really going into the warfare mode, is all Wetiku again. This is where we need to move into this kind of understanding of the trickster and paradox, and be able to handle the paradox outside of, again, this Western distorted mind. Because Wetiku abides in a higher dimensional space. Although, from the absolute point of view, Wetiku doesn't have any real existence. It is not a noun, it is a verb. We want to understand that Wetiku is just as real as me and you, in the sense that we are all relative. So coming out of the kind of disorder of the splitting of the mind, we need to use trickster logic. So we need to come away from this Western Aristotelian dichotomy or dual thinking, where either everything is good or bad, either everything is connected or everything is separate, either everything is dark or everything is light. And to do that, we move into trickster logic, which is valued logic. which is outside of Western thought. So it can be a really foreign thing or a really strange thing to bring into your mind. But what it does is it deconstructs the conditioned mind, your programs in your system, this kind of computer program of 1, 0, all or nothing, good, bad. And for value logic, thinking like the trickster, changes your awareness and allows your mind this neuroplasticity of coming into a new and expanded understanding of reality, allowing your mind to transcend the gripping of reality as something fixed. For valued logic will not allow you to have a fixed position at all. For valued logic rejects the two value reason. Two value reason is not comprehensive of reality. Reality transcends thought. For valued logic is taking us into intuitive awareness of the timeless existence of reality, of this kind of underlying dream that pervades everything. There is no existing world outside of the observer, and there is no observer outside of the world. So in for value logic, there's 4 options that are all valid at the same time, which is it's true, it's false, it's both true and false, and it's neither true nor false. And if you can hold all of this in your mind at the same time, you are able to understand yourself and Wetiku. Because Wetiku cannot be understood by the mind, but it's seeing how it operates through our mind that we are able to understand it. So the first way that Wetiku codes our mind, this virus programs our mind, is that we start to think that we exist as a separate self. And this separation is what makes all the other delusions that Wetiku makes up and invents seem possible. This is this diabolical nature of duality, of splitting everything into opposites. This is the fundamental beginning of the Wetiku virus. Doing this, separating things, is as insane as saying, the flame is separate from the heat, or trying to take the wetness out of water, or taking the sweetness away from sugar and separating the two. We can only do this in language that has this noun-based function. When you say, flame, heat, there are 2 nouns, but when you say it's burning, there's no separation. So again, it's really important to remember that we can see in darkness too. And that we need to recognize that, these kind of full-blown Wetikus is a refraction of our own evil. And if we don't recognize the darkness in ourselves, we are just projecting onto others, and then we become guilty of the same thing, which is shadow projecting. And that's what we're accusing them of, right? We begin to see it when we are able to focus and recognize the kind of psychological signature in ourselves and in others. The last thing that Wetiku wants is for us to be onto it. It gets its power from operating in the shadows and out of sight. And when you actually see the demon, it takes away all of its power, because it's only powerful when it's hidden. When we see Wetiku, we're not only taking the power away from Wetiku, but we're also taking away its power to see us. When, I'm thinking about the ostrich that kind of puts its head in the sand and thinks, if I can't see you, you can't see me. But this is like the opposite of that. When we have darkness inside of us and we're trying to get rid of the darkness in the outside world, it's like darkness trying to get rid of darkness, and all that does is generate more darkness. But when we go into our own darkness, they say ignorance is bliss, right? Well, no. it's the opposite. In Sanskrit, we call it Satchitananda, the awareness of truth or knowledge is bliss. When we can go into our own darkness, we don't want to get fascinated with wetiku as a thing, because it's not a thing, it's a verb, it's a doing. When we can see ourselves acting, doing wetiku, we're able to see it and release it. So what is the shadow? Well, the shadow is that part of us that we don't want to take responsibility for. When we don't take responsibility for our own shadow, for our own darkness, we will literally attract other people's shadow onto ourselves. It's like, psychic magnetism. And the shadow is the unconscious part. And when we take on the unconscious energy of somebody else, it's unconscious. So it's like, I don't know, I just, I feel so blah, blah. And then you realize, hang on a minute, this isn't my stuff. This isn't me. Return to sender with consciousness attached. Let them deal with it. This is not my shadow. But the reason why people's unconscious energy is so sticky and so gooey is because it's unconscious. If somebody, if I come to you and I say, you know what, I'm really angry, or I'm really jealous, or I'm feeling really sad, or I'm conscious of it. And the conscious energy is not sticky. And you can say to yourself, Maya's angry. I don't have to be angry. But if I'm, covertly angry or passively aggressively angry, and I'm trying to hurt you because I don't want to deal with it, that's going to cause you pain, right? And you might respond to me in equally negative, and we'll be shadow boxing with each other and creating a lot more darkness. Whereas if I can see, this person is having this emotion, or even if they're unconscious, but if I can be conscious of it in the moment. So really the work is conscious, to see, to know. And shadows are obviously really intimately related to light. We only see shadows when there is something giving light. And the deeper and the darker the shadow, the more powerful and strong is the light that is creating that shadow. And so when we want to discover our light, we're going to find it by going to the most shadowy parts of our psyche, the parts that we deny, disown, and marginalize. And by seeing the origin of those shadows is where we're going to discover the light. So we have to talk about false light. And the false light is rampant in the New Age. I genuinely feel that the New Age has been infiltrated by a very specific type of wetiku. Again, this kind of false angel that proletizes and says, I have all the answers, I have all the correct information, and a lot of what they tell you is good. But then there's this 20% of wetiku energy in there. Again, this greed, this sensation that I am separate, that I can somehow dominate my reality. So there's a word here that I love, which is antimimos. And antimimos is a type of deception where it imitates something, but with the intention of making the copy, the fake version, serve a purpose opposite to the original thing or idea. So this is the very spirit of the devil impersonating an angel of light. Antimimon spirit is a malevolent force which tries to seduce us, to lead us astray. It creates an inversion of value, transforming truth to falsehood and falsehood to truth, leading us to forget. And again, I feel like, with all of these kind of gurus that have fallen recently, and all these gurus where, there was sexual scandals and rape and abuse taking place within the quote-unquote cult, is because the person in charge was infected with Wetiku. And again, that's why they were so charismatic. That's why they were so they made their followers feel so good, because they're feeding them this Wetiku energy. And it's also very possible that these kind of spiritual teachers start off with, we're all infected with Wetiku, but they start off quote unquote normal and good. But as they rise and start to have more and more influence, they become a really good target for Wetiku. So Wetiku kind of, gets in there, and from being, having a normal level of Wetiku to becoming full-blown. And I think we can see this happening a lot if we're honest. So another thing that can really trigger Wetiku is also our guilt. And I really am not sure anymore, but I've heard the definition of the difference between guilt and shame, that, shame is a natural emotion that we can see in animals, whereas guilt is a thought. So this is an interesting idea, right? If we think about Wetiku being a mind virus. So guilt is when we can feel bad about something that we're doing intellectually, as opposed to shame, which is a physical feeling, if that makes sense. So when we're not willing to experience our shame or our guilt, we push it away. And we do this until we no longer recognize it, So this kind of thought comes in, we feel guilty, we start thinking guilty thoughts, but then it's too much, so we repress it. And in repressing that guilt, we're pushing the Wetiku deeper into us. And again, we're creating this splitting of the soul. And so what is demonic possession? Well, demonic possession is a frequently occurring psychic phenomenon where certain autonomous complexes take control of the personality in place of the ego, to the degree that the free will of the ego is suspended. The personality changes themselves around this pathology, around this autonomous complex, which masks the inner dysfunction. And it's really hard to recognize, because the Wetiku bug can take over and displace the person, and the person just becomes a puppet and a marionette. Once the Wetiku is taken over completely, it's calling the shots. And someone who is completely taken over by Wetiku has nothing, cannot get rid of it. They can't do anything about it. And in really advanced stages, we can say, the person, that soul, is no longer there. They're just an empty shell carrying the disease. So in that sense, there is just the disease, or, if you want to talk psychological terms, it's just the disorder that's left. And the disorder is operating through what appears to be a human being. And the person becomes so identified with the mask, the persona, but there's nobody wearing the mask. There's nobody behind the mask. So, again, suffering. Then we become identified with our mask, or we feel that we are separate from life. We are in suffering. When we're suffering, we're in the mother of all illusions, and we're kind of turn things around and seeing a false reality. So this kind of narcissistic viewing that, the world is here to make me feel better. The world is here to fix me. Everything is against me. Like all these type of thoughts is really emblematic of the Wetiku taking over. So a lot of this internal suffering is Wetiku. And the Buddha said, life is suffering. Once you can accept that you have Wetiku, you can start to come out of it. Or you can have it coming out of you, take it out of you, whichever way you want to see it. So I want to talk a little bit about where we are, because it's not just you, you know. We say like the Wetiku originated in Psyche, but not you. Because we're also living in this kind of crisis, this kind of soup of mental derangement, where we are again, you know, giving so much credence and so much admiration and so much hatred and so much of our mental and psychological and spiritual energy to these masks. We are all part and accomplices in this world that's gone mad. We're living in a mad world, but the world is not just, you know, outside of us. The world is a reflection of what's happening in us. And the part of us that thinks we don't have a mad part is the mad part. So it's only by confronting the insane and inhuman in ourselves that we can become truly human. We have to see how we've been deceived and what the Wetiku has done to us, how far we've come off course, because it's not until we can see how far we've come away from ourselves that we're able to come back, to recognize the path back. To see how we've been led astray is part of becoming enlightened, or becoming enlightening, to make it a verb. Many of us don't realize how insane our collective has become because it's so normalized. We've been conditioned to accept being in this kind of endless war that, you know, we're witnessing genocides and xenocides of animal species being completely eradicated in ancient tribes, and constant murder as if it's normal. We think it's normal to be obsessed with the way we look. We think it's normal to be obsessed with how much money we have. We need a radical expansion and up-leveling to understand what health is, what healthy relationships are, and that all these kind of psychiatric disorders like schizophrenia or bipolar or depression or ADHD are disabling to the individual, but that they can be controlled. It opens us up to being controlled. Whereas compared with many other kind of clinical disorders, Wetiku is not disabling. So like if you have ADHD, it creates a lot of difficulties in your life. The more Wetiku you have, the easier your life becomes in a way, right? Because you can turn off the suffering. You can turn off all the bad feelings and just be in the state of I'm great, I'm good, I'm on the force of good, you know. So compared with all these other kind of clinical disorders and all these names and words and labels, you know, autism and depression and anxiety, very little research has been done on psychopathy, even though psychopathy creates more social distress and disruption and disorder in society than all of the other psychiatric disorders combined. And I know for me, like, I had a conversation with a friend recently about how I feel like, and this is just my personal opinion and it might change, but I feel like autism is on the very polar opposite of the spectrum to psychopathy. And where does it come from then, this civilization? Well, Wetiku kind of corresponds to the rise of civilization. Civilization was forcing our idea of what nature should be onto nature. It is this unsustainable industrial civilization that requires more and more violence to maintain itself. It's an overly one-sided dominance of the rational, intellectual mind that disconnects us from our nature, from empathy, from ourselves. And in fact, many indigenous communities saw that these European colonialists were infected with Wetiku, and they thought this must be a defining characteristic of the culture from which these people came. And it really does seem that the last sort of 2,000 years of Western culture is the story of the epidemiology of the Wetiku disease itself. This kind of diabolical energy that is playing out is in all of us. We get hooked through our unconscious blind spots, and we just keep repeating the same and the same. So seeing the darkness is a form of illumination itself. And we didn't think of the great open plains, the beautiful rolling hills, and the winding streams with tangled growth as wild. Only to the white man, nature was wilderness, and only to him, the land infested by wild animals and savage people. To us, it was tame. Earth was beautiful and bountiful, and we were surrounded with the blessings of the great mystery. Not until the hairy man from the east came with brutal frenzy and heaped injustices upon us and our families. It was wild for us. And another paradox about the Wetiku is Thanatos. Wetiku has its own death instinct. It isn't trying to take power and control and live forever, although I think it thinks it is. It is killing itself. It's killing us. Wetiku's kind of modus operandi, their MO, is to root out and kill everything that feels tender, vulnerable, and alive within themselves and within the people it grows inside of. So systematically murdering anything or everything within them which could produce a crack that encases their heart. And so Wetiku's insatiable hunger will cause it to literally eat everything, including itself. So how do we fight? Well, the first part is our creativity, our imagination. And we've talked a lot about this in the spiral, that shamanic work is really working with our creative imagination. And Einstein said, imagination is even more important than knowledge. When we realize that the psyche has a reality all on its own, we're able to influence that through our imagination. And the Wetiku, what it does is it cuts off that connection and pushes us into, logic and reason, and takes us away from our sacred creative imagination. And if we lose contact with the living reality of the imagination within ourselves, we become completely disoriented, disordered, and diseased. We become easy prey for the Wetiku bug because it informs our lack of imagination, and that's what it feeds on. So we find ourselves then unable to imagine a world without Wetiku. For alchemists, for shamans, the imagination is the subtle body that keeps us connected to life. Our imagination is our inner child. And do you remember how much imagination you had as a child? How free your imagination was? And you remember how these logical, rational adults told you to put it away, to stop, to come and live in this consensual reality, this mundane and ordinary reality, this agreed upon reality where the Wetiku is in charge. So when we're using imagination and we're using meditation, we are developing this inner creative dialogue, cultivating a living relationship to ourselves, to our unconscious part. When an unconscious part is about to become conscious, it becomes first partially conscious. So it's kind of visible and invisible. And when we go with our active imagination and enter creative dialogue with these unconscious contents, we help them move into the conscious. When we use active imagination, we can have a relationship. We can give our unconscious parts shape and form, make them into a subject that we can relate to. When we do this, we disidentify from them and we give them a voice. So we're taking these autonomous complexes, these split off parts of our soul, and we let them become embodied again. We give them a mind of their own and help them come back home. And one way we can do this is to work with archetypes. And archetypes are fully in the collective unconscious. When an archetype gets activated, it doesn't do it through our conscious mind. It's in our sympathetic nervous system. So, rational and logic is out the window. When an archetype is affected, it works through us like a drug. And it is in our unconscious. What we can do, instead of letting the Wetiku be in control of our inner archetypes, is that we can use our creativity to bring them back into our consciousness. When someone is gifted in the art of touching archetypes, they can play the souls of people like the strings of a guitar, plucking higher dimensional chords of our being and activate this resonance in the collective. The person who is channeling the living power of a deeper archetype can entrance and entrain others, and this can be used for the highest good to help people awaken, or it can be used for the darkest of evil to manipulate and disempower and enslave others. Archetypal energy isn't good or bad. It depends on our intent. It depends on what we do with it. So when we have this kind of darker Wetiku archetypes being pulled into us, we can think about, kind of going berserk, for example, like the Vikings used to. They would imagine that they would get possessed by the spirit of wild animals and go crazy and kill and hurt and rape. Or we can imagine ourselves being filled by the archetype of the innocent child, of the creative child, of the artist, of the muse. The possibility of waking up is that we first have to become aware of what is keeping us asleep. Otherwise, we cannot do it. We are in this collective psychosis right now, and not many people talk about it. This madness has become normalized to the point where we don't even realize that we're sleeping. If reality is a dream, we want to be aware that we're dreaming. We don't want to be asleep. You see the difference? When we see through the illusion of our separate self rather than seeing through the separate self, we're able to recognize this pathological tendency of needing to control. Recognizing this is to find compassion for ourselves. Compassion is our immune system against this virus. So what is your responsibility? If we want to solve a problem, we have to take responsibility for it. It's my problem. I'm going to study it. I'm going to master it. I will take responsibility for it. And then I will act in accordance to what I find. I will do that which I can do. But we live in a world where taking responsibility is actively disencouraged. We are encouraged to stay as victims. We are encouraged to blame them, to project the darkness outside of ourselves. And when we do that, we give our power away. When we refuse the opportunity to take responsibility and we identify as victims, we are rejecting the opportunity to change ourselves and how we feel and how we act. We reject the opportunity to reinvent our world. And the truth is that you hold in yourself, in your spirit, in your soul, in your thoughts, and in your actions, the power to transform your participation, and through your participation, the situation for the collective. Everything that is happening in our world requires the participation of millions and billions of people. We are all involved. We are all responsible. The way through is to invoke our imagination, to literally change our minds. This is alchemy. Alchemy is an expression of the fact that light is hidden in the darkness, that the deepest blessings is found in the most distressing shadows of our psyche. So is the shadow on our planet actually helping us find the light? When we come to terms with evil, it seems like evil might be playing a key role in helping us discover our inner hero or heroine. The goal of alchemy is to unlock the light that's encoded and imprisoned inside of darkness. And Jung says, as long as Satan is not integrated, the world is not healed and man is not saved. But Satan is a representation of evil, and how can we integrate evil? And there's only one possibility: to make evil our friend. That means we assimilate it, we raise it into consciousness. We take that which is not light and we bring it to the light. We integrate our soul completely. We become awake by making the darkness conscious. When there's light in the darkness, it comprehends the darkness. The darkness no longer prevails. Sunlight is the best disinfectant. Although we think of illumination as seeing the light, part of becoming enlightening is also seeing the darkness. In becoming illuminated, it is the darkness that illuminates us. So what are some practical tools for you to do this work? Well, meditation. To come into the true nature of your being, even as you go about your day, to not see meditation as something separate from your day-to-day activity, but to see that meditation is a part of life. When you go into meditation with the idea that you're going to attain something that you don't have, or that you're going to take a break from yourself, or that you're going to take a break from your life, you're again creating this separation. So let your meditation simply be allowing yourself. Maybe it doesn't feel like anything's happening, but to just be in that I am space. And another way of protecting ourselves is to understand that we are in touch with our wholeness. To really see that you don't need to ask something else to protect you, but that yourself, your ego, your positive ego, your strong self is the most powerful talisman or amulet that you can have. That is your shield. We cannot try to destroy evil, because then we're playing evil's game and we've already lost, right? There's nothing that we can do, but it's who we are. It's not that we try to fix Wetiku, it's that Wetiku helps us fix ourselves. This is the archetypal journey of the hero, right? That we need this shamanic descent into the darkness of our own depth, where we are able to heal ourselves through the experience of suffering. When we recognize that the reality of the psyche we're in is leading us somewhere, when we recognize that we need to know our enemy in order to love them, then we are working with our own power. A way of responsibly working with Wetiku is to tend to and attend to what Wetiku triggers in us. Obviously, shamanic journeying and soul retrieval is going to be a huge part of bringing your soul back into integrity, of creating this strong sense of self, of having a healthy ego. When we go into the darkness of our own shadow, this is when we become introduced to the world of spirit. And going inward means going upward in consciousness, in kind of speaking in dimensional language. The shamanic idea that we have to go into the unconscious dark night of the soul to discover the pearl of wisdom is the foundation of shamanism. And so soul retrieval is something that we are going to work on with the spiral. It's coming up in chapters. Soul retrieval isn't something that is a quick fix. Soul retrieval is a big part, because when we've had this severe trauma, when we've had events that have fragmented and fractured our soul, when we want to heal from that, we have to go back in time and re-experience, relive, and release the event so that we can have a corrective experience. And so when we do shamanic journeys in this sense, we are joining two moments in time, the present and the past. And so we are retrieving that split off part of our soul and bringing it back to ourselves. This is not something to do carelessly. This is something that needs to do very carefully, because again, that split off part can be quite disordered and chaotic. We need to be able to handle it. But how do we work on immunity? Well, when we get strong enough in our sense of self, we become more and more immune. When we realize that our systems are under constant attack, not just from, the Wetiku virus, but also from toxic environment, toxins in our food, the electromagnetic signals that we're in, all the propaganda of the psyop that we're in, the stressful way of living in life, also things like being born through cesarean, which takes away that louche, that protective coating that we get from our mother. All of these things that keep us weaker. So in order to overcome this, it's really important that we get psychically strong. Psychic strength is integrity of the soul. To have our own independent thought, to be able to self-reflect, to discriminate and discern. And this is when we're able to become free. And Wetiku is really here to help us remember our freedom. To become free from Wetiku is to literally have an expansion of consciousness and to step out of the limitations of our own mind, which can be perceived as being crazy by some people, but it really means to find ourselves inside ourselves. To realize that being in this world is to be in this experience of psyche. That to be in a dream and to realize that we're dreaming, that the boundary between the inside and the outside dissolve. In shamanic understanding, Wetiku cannot be killed by ordinary means and by ordinary people. People who are in the spell of the ordinary, mundane, consensual reality don't stand a chance. Because Wetiku is a formidable and uncanny energy. It operates through the demonic, the archetypal, and the magical levels of the psyche, and it can only be dealt with through similar channels and by very high-level accomplished shamans. But a real cure for Wetiku involves this radical shift in consciousness, coming out of the limited and limiting two-value logic of the conventional mind and coming into a more expansive four-value logic. The cure for Wetiku is expanding our consciousness, coming into a higher dimensional space, not just of being, but being itself. In this way, we don't fix Wetiku, but Wetiku helps us fix ourselves. What is required from you is courage and clarity and discernment. It will feel like what it feels like for a cult member who snaps out of the collective brainwashing of the system that they were held in for so long. For some of us, it's many generations. When we recognize that we have been complicit, we have played our part in the collective madness, it is both liberating and traumatizing. It's sort of like PTSD, right? Or CPTSD, if it's complex. In other words, when we realize the trauma of being asleep, we get the energy to wake up. The kind of traumas that we experience can be good for us in the sense that it shakes us up, snaps us out of this fear-based, frozen sleep paralysis that we're stuck in. In that 4-value logic, the paradox is that the trauma itself is what activates the response to heal. In these moments of shock, we have the opportunity to break our habitual patterns, to see through our assumptions, to come out of our denial, and to step out of the programming so that we can rewire ourselves. If we don't, we'll stay asleep. And so, welcome to reality. Reality is this collective dream that we're dreaming at the same time, being awakened through it. In Buddhism, they call it dependent co-arising or interdependent co-origination. It's paticca samuppada in Pali. And this is what the Buddha woke up to when he sat under the Bodhi tree. The Buddha was always coming back to this paticca samuppada, that things are dependently co-arising, that the one who sees the codependent origination of the world sees the Dharma, the truth. We don't exist as discrete entities separate from the universe, but we are in relation to other parts of the universe. There's nothing that's fixed. There's nothing that's substantial. There are no nouns, as much as our language tries to trick us into believing that we are living in a reality of things, where the reality is all verbs, doings, movings, thinkings, feelings, energy in motion. And so thank you for being courageous enough to go on this journey into darkness with me. I hope that this Chronicle of Darkness is helpful. I hope that this Chronicle of Darkness has inspired you to set yourself free.